In the 7th century, Arabia's armies swept across the world like fire, unstoppable, divine, and brutal. From Persia to Egypt, they conquered mighty empires in mere decades. But then, they came south, to the land of Nubia. And for the first time, they failed. Not once, but for over 600 years. This is the story of the African kingdom that held the line, and the warrior king who turned back the greatest conquest in history. This is the untold war between Islam and Africa, where spears met sabers, arrows met empires, and Africa stood unbroken. Before the rise of Islam, North Africa was a battleground of empires: Greek, Roman, Byzantine. But south of Egypt, along the winding Nile, stood the ancient Christian kingdom of Makuria, a Nubian civilization with a proud warrior tradition, fortified cities, and a deep-rooted faith. Makuria was not some desert tribe. It was a strategic powerhouse, with its capital in Old Dongola, a walled fortress city surrounded by sandstone cliffs and the mighty Nile. From there, Makuria governed trade routes, mined gold, and guarded the southern frontiers of Christian Africa. When Islam emerged in the 7th century and swept through the Arabian Peninsula, its armies didn't stop in Mecca or Medina. They expanded. By 640 AD, the Caliphate had conquered Egypt, overwhelming the mighty Byzantines and shattering centuries of imperial rule. And now, the Islamic armies stood at Nubia's northern gates. These were not scattered desert raiders. These were organized elite forces, men forged in jihad, driven by religious fire and military genius. Under the command of Amr ibn al-As and later Abdullah ibn Sa'ad, the Rashidun Caliphate marched with confidence. They had swept through the Levant, crushed the Sassanids, and shattered Roman defenses in Africa. To them, Makuria was just another name on a list, another conquest waiting to fall. But they were wrong. Makuria was not Persia, and it was not Rome. It was African, born of centuries of resilience, desert warfare, and river defense. Its kings were warrior priests, trained in both strategy and scripture. Their soldiers knew the land, knew how to vanish into the sand, how to strike from the cliffs, and how to defend what was sacred. Makurian generals relied not on size, but on tactics, terrain, and terrifying precision. And their greatest weapon? The archers of Nubia. Feared across Africa, Makurian archers were known for one thing: aiming for the eyes. Their long bows, carved from acacia and strung with sinew, could pierce armor from over 200 meters. Entire formations of Arab cavalry were blinded before they ever reached the walls of Dongola. These were not just warriors, they were ghosts with perfect aim. In 642, just 2 years after taking Egypt, the Rashidun Caliphate launched its first invasion of Makuria. A detachment under Uqba ibn Nafi crossed the Nile into Nubian territory, confident that these southern tribes would crumble. But what followed was a disaster. Makurian scouts tracked their movements, using riverboats and cliffside posts. They never engaged directly, but harassed relentlessly. Ambushes at dawn, arrows at dusk, and poisoned wells left in the path. Arab sources recall a brutal campaign. Their men were wounded and blind, literally. So many soldiers were struck in the face that the Arabs called Nubians the marksmen of God. After weeks of mounting casualties and zero territorial gain, the Arab army retreated, marking one of the only failed invasions of the early Islamic expansion. What made Makuria different? 1. Asymmetrical warfare. They never fought head-on. They fought guerrilla style, using ambushes, narrow ravines, and night raids. 2. Archery superiority. Eye-targeting archers created psychological terror. Even veteran Muslim warriors feared their aim. 3. Environmental mastery. Makurians controlled the Nile crossings, sabotaged supply routes, and used desert heat as a weapon. 4. Political stability. Unlike many frontier regions, Makuria had a centralized monarchy, strong churches, and loyal governors. 5. Faith as a fortress. The Makurians believed God had chosen them to defend Christian Africa. To them, the war was not just survival, it was divine destiny. The Caliphate was stunned, but they were not done. In 652 AD, 10 years after their first failure, the Arabs returned, this time with a larger force under the command of Abdullah ibn Sa'ad, the governor of Egypt. This invasion would lead to the Battle of Dongola, the most decisive battle between Islam and Christian Africa. Makuria would be tested like never before. But the result would echo for centuries. They had conquered Rome, they had conquered Persia, but what they met in Nubia was something else. Because this time, Africa fought back. In the year 652 AD, they came again. This time, they brought cavalry, siege engines, and a vengeance forged in failure. At their head was Abdullah ibn Sa'ad, a veteran commander and the newly appointed governor of Egypt. His orders were clear: crush the Nubians, bring Makuria to its knees, and secure the Nile trade routes for Islam. But King Kalidurut of Makuria had anticipated this. The Makurians had spies in Egypt. They knew the Arabs were coming, and they had turned Dongola into an impenetrable fortress. High sandstone walls, narrow approach routes designed to bottleneck cavalry, rooftop platforms where archers nested like falcons, hidden caches of water and food to outlast any siege. This was not a city waiting to fall. This was a trap. The Muslim army arrived at Dongola in early autumn. Their war banners flew high. Thousands of cavalry, infantry, slaves hauling siege towers. The Makurians did not meet them at the gates. Instead, they waited. The Arab commanders interpreted the silence as fear. They ordered an immediate assault. But when the towers neared the walls, the sky turned black with arrows. Makurian archers fired from slits in the stone. They didn't aim for the chest. They aimed for the eyes. Arab records say hundreds were blinded in minutes. Makurian tactics were ruthless. Boiling oil poured from parapets. Wooden spikes buried beneath false sand. Traps laid where cavalry would charge. The Arabs lost men by the hundreds. After 2 weeks of siege, Abdullah ordered a full assault at dawn. Battering rams hammered the gates. Makurian defenders held with spears and fire. Then came a surprise counterattack. From hidden tunnels beneath Dongola, Makurian warriors emerged behind the Arab lines. They set fire to the Arab supply wagons, attacked their tents, cut off their water. It was chaos. Realizing they could not take Dongola and fearing more ambushes, Abdullah ibn Sa'ad ordered a retreat. But the Makurians did not chase. They sent messengers instead. What followed was one of the most unusual treaties in Islamic history, the Baqt Treaty, a peace agreement between Muslim Egypt and Christian Makuria. It lasted nearly 600 years. Under the Baqt, there would be no more invasions. Trade would resume across borders. Makuria would send 360 slaves a year to Egypt, a symbolic gesture, Egypt would send goods and grain in return. Makuria had done the unthinkable. In an age of empire and conquest, an African kingdom had stopped the greatest expansion in the world, not with luck, but with strategy, discipline, and divine resolve. They did not just defend their land. They redefined what power looked like. From the banks of the Nile. When the Arab army retreated in 652 AD, the land of Makuria was scorched, but not broken. The city of Dongola stood, its stone churches intact, its warriors scarred but proud. For the first time since the Arab conquest began, a Christian kingdom had not just survived, it had won. The Treaty of Baqt was signed, and it was no minor arrangement. It would remain in place for nearly 600 years. It dictated mutual peace, but more importantly, it acknowledged that the Arabs would not conquer Nubia. The Muslims agreed to stop their raids, and Makuria, in return, would send goods annually to Egypt. This was not tribute born of defeat. It was tribute born of strength. Because Makuria was not forced into submission, they negotiated from a position of power. Makuria knew the Arabs would not give up easily, so they fortified their kingdom. The blacksmith guilds worked overtime crafting iron weapons, shields, and armor. Camel and horse breeders became central to war logistics. The walls of Dongola were expanded, and the southern fortresses along the Nile became early warning stations. More importantly, Makuria embedded spies in key trade routes. They learned the movement of Egyptian governors, understood troop redeployments, and stayed 10 steps ahead. Makuria developed a military doctrine that combined mobility, terrain mastery, and archery. These were not just foot soldiers, they were specialists trained to shoot from horseback, to navigate desert storms, and to retreat in tactical silence, only to ambush from unexpected directions. Makuria's Christianity wasn't ornamental, it was political, it was nationalistic. Their kings were not just rulers, they were defenders of the faith. Churches doubled as war rooms. Monks served as scribes, chronicling victories and guiding moral decisions. When news of Muslim advances in other parts of Africa spread, Makuria responded with spiritual mobilization. Religious festivals turned into war drills. The gospel was preached as a rallying cry to defend God's chosen kingdom. Even the architecture served war. Churches were built with escape tunnels. Underground granaries ensured that sieges would not starve them. This wasn't blind faith. This was tactical spirituality. Over the centuries, multiple caliphates would try again to subdue Nubia. The Fatimids, the Ayyubids, the Mamluks, each sent raiding parties or emissaries demanding submission. Makuria answered with arrows. There were skirmishes in the 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries, but no conquest. The Treaty of Baqt was tested repeatedly, and every time the Arabs pushed, Makuria responded like a coiled lion. They fought in waves of ambush and used feigned retreats that lured Arab armies into kill zones. The vast desert became their ally. The Nile, their tactical map. Makuria was not rich in gold like Ghana or Mali, but it was rich in strategy. They created a civilization of defensive innovation. Their generals didn't seek fame in battle. Their names aren't etched into Western textbooks. But their actions echo louder than names ever could. 600 years. 600 years of holding back the most powerful empire of its time. Makuria stood when Egypt fell. When North Africa turned Islamic, Makuria held the Christian line. Makuria's end was not from conquest. It was slow erosion. By the 14th century, internal succession disputes and trade route disruptions weakened the kingdom. Islam spread gradually through intermarriage and trade, not by the sword. But let no one say they were conquered. Let no one rewrite the tale. Makuria died old, not slain. Why is this story not known? Why are children taught about the fall of Jerusalem, but not about the Black Kingdom that saved it from conquest? Because it shatters the myth. Because it shows that Africa did not just receive history. It made it. Makuria is proof that African kingdoms were not just reactive, but strategic, not just strong, but visionary. So remember this: when the armies of Islam thundered across Africa, one kingdom stood its ground. One kingdom out-strategized them. One kingdom forced a peace so strong, it lasted 6 centuries. That kingdom was Makuria. That king may not have a name in Western memory, but his people's victory is eternal. And now the world remembers.